Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another session of what I, in my head, am calling the ALBA Film Club, but I don't think that's the official name. Part of um, our ongoing series. Um, Thank you for accommodating us with the schedule change. As you might have heard, Peter Carroll passed away quite suddenly a week ago, 2 days ago, Monday last week. And there was quite a shock to all of us, and we're trying to process that loss. For those of you who were there at our last session, Casablanca, which Peter presented, um, I'm happy you could be there with him. Um, and I was at Peter and Jeanette's in June for 3 days at the end of June, actually to film a long interview with him, which we had planned in advance. And I have to say that completely nobody was expecting what happened. But in hindsight, I'm happy I was able to do that. And we have about 3.5 hours of raw footage for that we're going to edit and share with you when we can, probably this spring sometime. And so thank you for your accommodation and for understanding as we deal with this. This movie that we're going to see, that we're going to talk about today, is about trauma and loss, and that I think is appropriate. What I'm going to do is, after my quick introduction, I'll say a couple of things about the movie, and then I'll put you in groups to discuss a couple of questions, and then we'll report back like we have done in the past. Just my quick introduction. This is an event presented by the Abraham Lincoln Marriott Archives, a nonprofit founded in the late 70s, as many of you know. As many of you also know, we can do these programs only because of your generous support. We offer these programs free of charge, but should you feel compelled to support our work, Dennis Meany, our amazing executive assistant behind the scenes, who makes all this run, and Mark Wallum, our executive director, will be posting the link to donate if you feel compelled to donate today or tomorrow or anytime. If you feel compelled to make your donation a steady monthly donation, that is even more helpful for us for budgetary planning. This session will be recorded, is being recorded, which means that once we get to the Q&A, or the reporting back part, if you don't want your face and voice recorded, you can turn your camera off. The group session, when we divide you up into smaller groups to talk about the film, those parts are not recorded, so you don't have to worry about that. So let's talk a little bit about The Spirit of the Beehive, El Espíritu de la Colmena, this 1973 film by Victor Erice, his first feature film. And as it happens, his most recent, I can't say last, I guess, his most recent feature film, Cerrar los Ojos, closing your eyes, I think is being in theaters right now in some cities in the States. It was reviewed in the New Yorker magazine a couple of weeks ago. And if you have a chance to see it, I think having seen The Spirit of the Beehive will make you appreciate his most recent film all the more, because there's all kinds of reflections that come back in this last film that sort of, and quotes, I guess, that connect to his previous films, including prominently this magnificent and almost legendary film, The Spirit of the Beehive. So I thought, what can I say about this film now that I haven't already said in the introductory clip that you saw? And I thought I want to try to propose a thesis to you and then have you discuss that in groups. The film is so rich in allusions and links and symbolism. Like, you can spend 5 hours talking about this film and still not exhaust everything you can say about it, because it's clearly so well thought through, so carefully wrought, So like there's not a second in the movie that hasn't been thought through and isn't significant in the larger whole. But I thought the thesis I would like to propose to you and see what you think, what you make of that, and how you make sense of the rest of the film in relation to the thesis is that this is a movie about good and evil. That's really what this movie is about. The question that that thesis would leave us with is, what does it say about good and evil, or the distinction between good and evil, or can we tell whether what is good and what is evil? And secondly, what, if any, is the political implication of what it says about good and evil? Because after all, as you know, this movie was shot in the last couple of years of the Franco regime. It deals with the first couple of years of the Franco regime. So in a sense, between its setting and its shooting, it spans the entirety of the dictatorship in Spain. So a political reading of it is not illogical. It makes sense. But how exactly to do that reading, how to make sense of that reading, how to make a convincing political reading of it, I think is pretty challenging. So to sort of bring home this idea that the movie about good and evil, I want to share a clip with you from the film that is not often commented on, a little bit sometimes, but it seems kind of besides the plot point a little bit. It's one of the few clips in which we see Fernando, the father, interacting in a kind of fatherly way, like a normal parental way, with his two daughters, Isabel and Ana. And it's the scene where they go hunting for mushrooms. So I'm going to share that scene here with you, and then ask you to discuss. Okay, so here we go. Can everybody see this? Yeah, okay, great. Thank you for nodding.
Papá, ¿qué hay atrás?
Ya voy.
Es mala. ¿Cuánto te apuestas que es buena? No la toques. ¿A qué es buena?
Vamos a ver. Sí, señor. Una buena seta.
¿Sabes?
¿Quién de las dos sabe cómo se llama?
Palometa. Matamoscas.
No, la matamoscas es venenosa. Míralas bien.
¡Orejas!
Muy bien. Se la conoce por el color pardo y estos bordes ondulados.
Papá, ¿te has cogido alguna vez setas venenosas?
No. ¿Sabéis por qué?
¿Por qué?
Porque hago siempre lo que decía mi abuelo. Cuando no estés seguro de que una seta es buena, no la cojas. Porque si resulta que la coges y es mala y te la comes, se acabaron las setas y se acabó todo lo demás. ¿Lo habéis entendido?
Yo sí.
A mi abuelo no le hacía mucha gracia comerlas.
Right. So I think in my mind, this scene is about distinguishing good from bad, good and evil. It's about using your eyes to do that. It's about perception, which is an important theme in the movie. In this scene, Ana and Isabel pay heed to their father. Their father is the authority. Their father is teaching them. Ana is learning. But I would say that in the whole of the movie, Ana's learning, which is kind of what the dramatic tension about all is all about everything that Ana is learning. In the whole of the movie, Ana's learning happens independently of or almost against her father or her parents or the authorities. So this is an exceptional scene in that that's why I say it's one of the few normal parental scenes where the dad teaches his daughter something. Otherwise, Ana and Isabel have to learn everything pretty much on their own. And if this is almost a coming of age movie, even though Ana is only 6, but you can tell that in the intense experience she has in the course of the movie, she drifts away from her family. She has to form her own judgment of the world. So going back to my thesis, this movie is in the end it tries to tell us something about good and evil as Anna is learning something about good and evil. The question is, what is Anna learning about it? What does the movie tell us about it? And in the third point, how do we read that politically? So I think that's a good start to get you guys talking. So I'm going to divide you up in groups and give you about 10, 12 minutes or so to hash out that question. And what I'd love for you to do is to try to think of as many parts of the movie that you can remember that will connect to this theme of good and evil and how it plays out. In the introductory video, I talked a little bit about allegory, and it could get a bit technical. So if you want to avoid that question, you should avoid it. But the one thing I will say is that if allegory in its original, in its traditional use, is meant as a didactic genre to teach us about good and evil, like in the Bible, for example, or in the Middle Ages, this movie cites allegory and plays with allegory. Whether itself wants to be an allegory, I think is up for question. So if you want to go there, feel free to go there. If you don't want to go there in your group, don't go there. Just think about how the movie talks about good and evil and how we can think about that politically. So let's see here. We have about 60 people. So how about I make 6 rooms? So feel free to join your room when you get the notice, and I'll give you about 12 minutes. We'll check in with you. And after, so let's, just to be on the safe side, the very latest I'll call you back is at like 5:30. So about a quarter of an hour max. And we'll ask each group to assign one person to be in charge of the reporting back once we get back together. So you guys can figure that out too. Somebody who takes notes and who can summarize well. All right. So good luck with that. And we are back. I hope you had enough time to get started on some interesting discussion. Really, in the end, the thesis question was really meant for you all to get going on talking about something. So I'm hoping that as we report back, all kinds of other things will pop up and pop out about the film that will help us see it in a different light. You know, it's one of those films among here on our among us is Linda Ehrlich, who is a film scholar who recorded the introduction to the film for the Criterion Collection DVD and Blu-ray. And I think I remember correctly, Linda in her introduction says something like, this is one of those movies that makes you think after you've seen it and you never stop thinking about it. It's inconclusive, it's open-ended. It's not, you never know whether you got it right. There keep being loose ends. So we'll likely feel the same way at 6:15 when we close this, but it's fun anyway. So I'm super curious what you guys did with the question, is this a movie about good and evil? If so, how? And thirdly, what, if any, political dimension is there to that question? So group one, who is the reporter back for group
We
one?
have our friend Tony Geist.
Tony Geist, our young professor from Seattle.
No, there we
Yeah,
are.
you're good.
Okay. Yeah. So we had a really interesting discussion. And what came up was the difficulty of telling the difference between good and evil in the movie, in the same way that it's very difficult to tell the difference between truth and lies, right? And there were various scenes in the movie that made that apparent. And one of the things that is one of our people, Susana, who's Spanish, commented on the soundtrack, which was playing traditional children's songs, but without the words. And she pointed out specifically the one that's called Vamos a contar mentiras. We're going to tell lies now, right? That particular children's song. So there was also a lot of discussion in the group about mushrooms, and whether which one did Anna eat when she ran off into the woods at night? And, was it a hallucinogenic mushroom? Was it a good mushroom, a bad mushroom, and so forth. And then we talked a lot about Frankenstein, about the figure of the Frankenstein monster. And again, about the ambiguity of good and evil in that representation of Frankenstein. So one of our members pointed out the similarity between Frankenstein and Franco, the name Frankenstein Franco, right? Which I think was interesting. But the figure of Frankenstein is not all evil or good in the representation in the movie. The whole question of the monster and the Republican soldier who takes refuge in the ruined house. There was some comment that Franco made the Republicans and the Republic into monsters, right? And so that's, the Frankenstein Franco, this is clearly about post-war, about the effects of the post-war. We talked about the figure of the father as well, and his ambiguity. Basically, the only time he speaks in the whole movie is in that scene that you showed with the mushrooms. Other than that, he's totally silenced. We assume that his history, because of the photograph of him with Unamuno, that he was at the very least a Republican supporter. But what it's done is neutralize him so that he literally can't speak. And then we also talked about the bees and the spirit of the beehive, but I think that's going to be a later discussion, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was what we came up with.
Super rich, Tony. You did a lot in, 12, 13 minutes. Really, really good.
yeah.
Good job. I'll just mention a couple of things and I'll jump to group two. The soundtrack is really interesting. And it's one question you can ask is, who is the implied viewer of the movie, right? So it's an internationally watched movie, but many international audiences will miss those kind of references, as they will miss the reference of the painting in the back, of some of the other illusions in the film, and as well as what you mentioned, like you said. So when Anna leaves through the photo album, there's these pictures that to a Spanish audience, when it's half historically informed, will go, oh, wait a minute. Teresa had a bob cut. She was a liberated woman in the 30s, the 5 years of the Republic, right? Progressiveness. Fernando was friends with Unamuno. He was a liberal Republican. And now after the war, they clearly have been punished. They lost their jobs. Teresa was a teacher, it looks like. So there's other things that in Spanish audience would kind of fill in that could remain mysterious to people who don't happen to catch those quick allusions, including the amazing one that you mentioned of the children's songs without lyrics. Really, really good. Oh, the one thing I wanted to mention with the soundtrack is that one of the things that always jumps out at me is that how the movie plays with image and soundtrack. So there's so many shots with the soundtrack of the previous or post shots. So either Fernando is listening to the Frankenstein movie from his balcony, so you see him, but you hear the Frankenstein film. And there's other ones with the shadow play where there's it seems a seeming disconnect between the image and the soundtrack, which to me creates the effect of an enjambment in poetry, right? Where you get like a double meaning because two things happen at the same time. Group two, who's reporting back for group two?
Yeah, group two, we have Hillary Gardner. Hillary, if you'd like
Hillary, take it away.
Yeah, hola a tots. Bona tarda. Thank you, Sebastian, for hosting. We began with the question, not so much of good or evil, more of, is this an allegory? One of our group members felt that it was really mostly an expression of feelings, and in particular, feelings through what a child carries forward in life. And we talked about the feeling of fear being conveyed through the isolation and the barrenness of the landscape. That led us to question that the house that the family is in, and the village, sort of the relationship between the distance of the house to the village, what the house meant in terms of who they were previously or now in life. We talked about examples of cruelty, either the boys bullying or the older sister bullying her younger sister, or the men being bullies or cruel. And we talked about whether or not there's the hive of bees is meant to be an example of cruelty. Of course, you have all these shots of like this barren landscape and this barren shack where the soldier is shot and killed. What's really interesting about a lot of those shots of the landscape is they are from so far away. So even like when he's shot, it's from far away. And then like the next scene will be the close-up of the blood on the bread. So you have that kind of switching from very distant, barren, cruel land to like what Anna is seeing and going through and struggling with. We talked also about black and white. You know, there are moments of black and white in the film that help us sort of see her struggle, and also the house seeming so barren, like the furniture, the rooms being very barren, the hallway that the children run through to their father's office, which is like these 3 doors. So I probably left some things out. And we talked also about, in terms of the killing of the man in the shed, one of our group members mentioned the way that his death is spoken about. And then I kind of brought up the fact that it's not really spoken about. There's this exchange through the eyes of the father and the daughter at the table. There's this reveal with the pocket watch, but almost nothing is said. And so we talked about the cruelty of that and the censorship and Francoism about you cannot talk about what happened. So I don't.
That's really great. Thank you. Muchas gracias, Hillary. Yeah, no, you brought up great things. I mean, I think in the intro I mentioned the cinematography, right? And the tension and the back and forth between extreme long shots and extreme close-ups, I think is intense, right? Because you get this sense of these little girls in the huge, lost in the landscape. And then we get Anna so close up, like we're face to face with her, and we see her eyes, which are so powerful. And I think you're right that the sort of the post-war landscape, I want to almost say post-apocalyptic, but it's not it's really just post-war. But everything in it is empty. The house is empty. It's cold. The landscape is empty. Everybody is lost. Everybody's on their own in the end, right? Like the scene with the mushrooms is one of the few ones where we see them interact as a family-ish. Otherwise, Teresa writes letters to her maybe brother. Fernando writes for himself. Ana and Isabel do things together, but also separate everybody. And one thing that people have noted in the cinematography is that for most shots, except for the sisters, the characters, the parents and the sister are never in the same shot together almost. They're all shot separately. And that's sort of like, especially when they sit around the table, for example, you see each of them separately as opposed to sort of sharing a same space. Amazing. Yeah, really, really good comments. Group 3.
Group 3, we have Steve Birnbaum. Steve, take it away.
You're muted, Steve.
Yep.
Got it.
Okay, so we started off with a discussion of the mushrooms as well. And difficult to distinguish the good and the bad mushrooms, just as it's difficult sometimes to distinguish good and bad. The girls are taught to trust their instincts by the father, to distinguish between the good mushrooms, which I think, thought is the same as distinguishing between good and bad in life. There's a scene, in part of the scene, the father steps on the poisonous mushrooms, and I think there was a very symbolic motion there on how he did that, and does it represent the way to get rid of good and evil, to step on it? I don't know. Frankenstein monster, I think people felt there was a definite sort of interchange of characters between the Frankenstein monster and the Republican who died. And I think that, that is all centered around Anna and what she saw in the movie and what she learned with that death. Um, and is Frankenstein the remains of the Republic? That's another way of looking at it. The idea of what does Anna symbolize? Um, Hope was one of the interpretations. And you were talking about the family, and Linda pointed out to us that there's no shot in the whole film with the family all together. And so that was sort of an important indication, I think, of what we thought of society after the war, that the society was broken just like families were broken. I just want to add that the mood of the whole film generally seemed to be very flat. That's what we came up with.
Amazing, Steve. Thank you. Also a great discussion. The idea that the Frankenstein's monster could be the Spanish Republic is really, really interesting, right? Because as you said, for Anna, there's a link between the monster and the Republican soldier. Just like the monster, the soldier seems to be killed without reason. And to Anna, that's shocking because she identifies with both. She feels a connection with both. But that would also mean that the very last scene where Anna gets up out of bed, walks to the balcony, and invokes the spirit, she's speaking to the Spanish Republic. So there's a connection then between so this gets a little bit into our political reading, right? There's a connection between 1973 and 1940, where the spirit of the Republic is still alive.
You're frozen, Sebastian.
Nope.
The one guy.
If we could just hold tight for 1 second. Hold on.
The internet censors are here.
Oh yes,
They've
silenced
us.
Oh,
I'm
we got
back.
him back.
You're back.
Yeah. This was, I pretended to be frozen. It was really hard. I'm working on that. Steve made a great point about the monster being a republic. If Anna speaks to the spirit in the end, she speaks to the spirit of the republic, which carries throughout this Franco regime. But that I was going to say, so to me, a key scene is when the doctor speaks to the mother right before that and tells her, you should be lucky your daughter is alive. And she'll forget. She'll as time goes on, she will forget. To me, there's a tension between what the doctor says to the mother and the last scene in which Anna is not forgetting at all. She's invoking the spirit, right? So the idea that Spain will forget the Republican years and move on is here kind of counteracted with Anna saying, no, I'm not forgetting. I had a connection with the monster and I will keep that. So the trauma, Anna is traumatized, but she's also not maybe that traumatized. She just grew up in a way. She had a connection with the monster. She was found by her parents. And now she's going kind of her own way, maybe. I don't know. That's one reading. But great, super suggestive, Steve. Group 3, before I freeze again.
We have Jim Brochar.
Jim, take away.
Hi. I don't want to duplicate too much of what's already been said, but we start with the mushrooms and the seriousness of the decision, the criticality of being able to distinguish between the good and the bad. It's framed as life and death. And I think what Peter mentioned, Peter Kuttner, is the dialogue is actually, the father says, if you get a bad one, it's the end of everything. So there's a fatality of finality as a consequence of not being able to discern. And at the same time, Anna, who is, I think we all agree, as symbolizing innocence, when she sees the Frankenstein movie, she can't figure it out. And actually, I would say she's maybe more accurate in not knowing if the monster is good or bad, whereas most viewers want to see him as evil. But that's my personal take. The clear similarities between the wounded soldier and the monster as being fugitives from a mob or authorities is pretty clear. And another thing that I took note of was Sarah's comment that Anna also has a change in perception of good to bad regarding her father. And so the theme of discernment and deciding and noticing for yourself and then acting based on what you see is maybe deeper than I could first take when I watched it. But she seems to alter her perception of him when she attributes his role in the killing of the soldier. The last thing is, personally, I think this may just my own observation is the earlier mention of the beehive. And to me, that's the spirit of a collective. The bees seem to act as one, which is similar to the mob chasing the monster or the Guardia Civil chasing the fugitive. But it made me think that one of the seminal works in Spanish literature is a play called Fuente Ovejuna. And it's by Lope de Vega, maybe 15th, 16th century. But it is, in brief, a story of a pueblo taking arms action collectively against what they view as oppression and evil. And the end of the film, the authorities come to solve the crime of who committed this act. And the townspeople all reply, Fuente Ovejuna. The town did it, we did it, but no one did it. And if you study Spanish literature, that is one of probably, I would say, the top 10, if not 5, gems in the crown of understanding Spanish culture.
Super interesting, Jim. Thank you. Super rich also. I completely agree with you that Anna is learning to discern and to make up her own mind, and her switching perception of her dad helps her. I mean, it's traumatic, but it helps her also distance herself from her dad as an authority. Going back to the thing that Tony said from group 1, truth and lies is like there's good and evil, there's truth and lies, and those are two different kinds of distinctions. Because I would say, because as Isabel says, movies are all lies. Nonetheless, for Anna, the movie is a source of truth in a way, right? Just like this movie we're watching could be a source of truth, even though it's fiction. And whether what the movie says about collective versus individual, I think it's super ambiguous too, because you can read the bees the way Fernando sees them, kind of from above as lowly and sort of like not knowing what they're doing. You can also read them as collective action and solidarity, like Fuente Ovejuna. I think that's a really interesting question that I don't think the movie leaves super clear. Great. Thank you, Jim. Next, group 5.
Yes, we have Jennifer Aluti. Should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thanks. This is so interesting, so great to hear people's thoughts. I'm a little bit distracted because I just want to say personally, Tony, so wonderful to see you. I'm Jennifer Arletta, and I lived with Abe Osheroff and Gunnar Clark in 1990. So just lovely to see you, just on a personal note. My group was lovely. We had some really lovely discussion. We moved through a lot of different things, some similar to what the groups were doing, coming to obviously the sense of like good and evil, not so simple. We were coming up with some examples of specific scenes with Anna and Isabel about that, and thinking about how Anna in one of the scenes where they're going to bed, says you're a liar, because Isabel a liar. And then I was actually remembering another scene while people were talking, in the scene where Anna and her mother are together, and her mother is very intimately brushing her hair, and Anna asks about bad spirits and good spirits. And again, that clarity her mom gives about the good and evil, and Anna, trying to take that in, I think is very interesting, that as a child, trying to figure these things out. We were talking about the Frankenstein movie also, and the idea of the girls and Anna filling in the story, given that they maybe didn't see whole parts of the film, as there was maybe editing that happened in the film. But then also one of our English majors in our group reflected that in the film, the Frankenstein film, they didn't actually have the scene where Frankenstein kills the girl, so they wouldn't have known how it happened. So the idea that Anna is remembering the scene where the cat, or the girl looked like she was being choked, and filling in with what happened there. Isabel filling that in also maybe with the scene where she's choking the cat. So that idea of that one-to-one, that the girls are playing those out to see what they feel like, and what that truth is. Somebody also made a reflection about, and that's the last thing I'll say in terms of the political piece of it, thinking about the girls sort of with each other, but also kind of against each other. The commentary maybe in the Civil War around brother against brother, sister against sister in that Civil War.
Really good. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jennifer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's interesting that the cruelty committed by the girls, right, is interesting, and Isabella's particularly, as well as Anna's attraction to danger, and both the girls' attraction to danger, right? And one thing that makes me think of is, I think Jim said Anna is the embodiment of innocence, and I think that's true. That's why she's so easy to relate to for us, I guess. But there's also a way in which the movie seems to celebrate that innocence as a better source for discernment than the mature adults who are already have been sort of like indoctrinated or steeped in ideologies that make them assign good and evil way too quickly without seeing the nuance of it. So that Anna's in the end trusts her own instincts as a child, which makes her in a way more mature than the adults who've lived through this war and are traumatized by it. Yeah, so thank you, Jennifer. We have a last group, I think, to report.
Yes, I believe Linda Willem. Linda?
Yep. Okay. Yeah, our group said a lot of things that the first group did, so I won't reiterate that, but some of the different things, we were very much talking about how nothing's really said outright. I mean, you have to sort of pick things up from the movie, and because of that, it could be very confusing. If for example, you didn't pick up on the photos at the beginning, you wouldn't know maybe what side of the family was on. If you didn't see the photo with Unamuno, you wouldn't know what was going on there, and we didn't know, if somebody wouldn't know if somebody was on the Republican side or the nationalist side during the war, and who is this person who just showed up coming from the train and then showing up in this hut. Who is that? And so the idea that the movie, it reveals things visually, it reveals things without words, and it can be confusing to people if you don't pick up on that. The group was very much talking about the Maquis in the Republican fugitive in the hut. Was he possibly the lover of the mother? She has these letters. It makes sense that they were all on the same side during the Civil War. Has he come back? So that sort of idea of who's on what side and where how that sort of breaks down politically is one of the things that isn't stated outright, so that could be very confusing. But then all the other things too about everything is left ambiguous at the end. So the positive part is that you can give it various interpretations. So those two ideas. The thing that came up often was the idea of how brave Anna was. Indeed, Anna was always putting herself in danger. She was always putting up herself in dangerous situations and not shying away from it. And I mean, the whole idea of going to see the Maquis and going to seek out the Frankenstein, and even things like jumping over the hoguera, the fire, and touching the mushroom. I mean, all of those things are putting herself in danger. Going to the railroad tracks, all of those things are self-put, and she's very brave. The good and evil, we talked about a lot about the Frankenstein. What defines good and evil? Okay, many people would say the monster is evil, but look at him with the little girl. He was so tender, and he were throwing the flowers in the water. He didn't know that if he threw her in the water, she was going to sink. So, who defines what's good and evil? And during the war, who was on what side was defined on who is good and evil. But after the war, during the dictatorship, the Republicans are the evil, okay, to the government. And so that sort of thing, that good and evil is defined political terms by who's in power. And then, oh yeah, and the thing that I thought was very interesting that was brought up absolutely first was that someone had said, put it very lovely. They said that there was a haunting specter of secrets throughout this. And so that ties into what a few other people had mentioned about the idea of truth versus lies. So in between truth and lies are secrets. And so that also works in with that. And so I thought that was quite interesting. Everybody has secrets in this movie and nobody talks. So.
Super interesting, Linda. Thank you so much. Linda Ehrlich, I saw you shaking your head when Linda was talking about the Maquis being Teresa's lover.
Is she?
Okay.
Yeah.
Linda, you want to say something about that? You're muted though. Dennis, can you unmute Linda Ehrlich?
Absolutely.
Audio. Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I don't want to impose my interpretation on anybody, but I will say that one I do reject. I do reject that. We don't know who the mother is writing to. Victor Ardithe told the actress, imagine you're writing to your son. She had no idea who she was writing to, but that doesn't matter. I mean, the character, I don't think that there's a connection between the two. The connection with the Maquis, Frankenstein, all of that, yes, but it's not a romantic movie like that. I would not go there myself.
Yeah, I think that I looked up at one point. So there's a shot where there's the letter coming from the person that Teresa's writing to that is, I think, being burnt in the
Right.
the fireplace. And if you make out the name, that was the actress's actual brother,
Yeah.
for what it's worth.
Yeah,
It's weird. It's interesting how the movie itself dissolves the distinction between fiction and reality by naming everybody by their own name as well, right? As I said in my introductory film. Super interesting, Linda. We have about 15 minutes left. I'd love to talk a little bit more about
Could I just say though,
Go ahead, Peter.
the soldier jumped off the train at that village. Was that just a coincidence? No, he came to see her.
That's an
Why
interesting
was he there?
hypothesis.
Why was he there? Why was he there right after she'd been writing letters? I'm just saying, to me, that was the clue that
Yeah.
he did come back to see her.
Okay, but she writes the letters to a concentration camp in France, right? To the Red Cross in France. So he
Okay.
would have had to cross the border. Not impossible, but it's an interesting hypothesis.
Oh,
But
okay.
the cinematic language of the film suggests that. I remember picking up, I don't remember what happens before we see him jump, but I think there's an implied connection when he goes there, and he is wounded when he arrives, which implies somebody shot at him at some point.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. He's undefined, but I mean, and I think that goes with the idea, like a lot of his unsaid, and there's a lot of room for us to interpret, right? And purposely. In that connection, I think, like I said, there's lots of hints, allegorical hints, right? Like the blood-soaked bread suggests Christ, right? So therefore, the soldier is a Christ figure, a martyr, like, right? Maybe Frankenstein is a Christ, a martyr. So which also flips good and evil up, like back, and like it plays with good and evil in that way. My own sense, I'm not sure if you guys agree, is that for all the hints that it makes to allegory, the movie itself refuses to be allegorical because it refuses a clear correspondence between what's represented and what is doing the representing. Like everything is multiply interpretable, and therefore the movie, I think, in the end rejects allegory as a way of understanding the world, and proposes something much more nuanced. Now, politically speaking, to me, that makes things more complicated, because you make a movie about post-Civil War Spain in which you say, who knows what is good and who knows what is evil, which in the mid-1970s made sense because that was the way out of the mess of the war and the dictatorship. In a way, it paves the way for the transition, which in a way is what the doctor says, like, Anna will forget, she'll be able to move on. And the idea of moving on was big. The idea of moving on was championed by the left in the 1970s, because that meant that political prisoners would be freed. It meant that democracy would be reinstated, right? Now, since 2000, the past 25 years, the left has shifted its interpretation. It's like, no, it's important to assign good and evil, and it's important to achieve justice, and the victims of the regime should be vindicated, and the representatives of the regime should be condemned. But in the 70s, I would say that was not what was at stake. But I'm not sure if you guys read that, say the ambiguity of the movie in a political term as a progressive position to say, like, the Franco regime was all about assigning good and evil. To move forward, we have to abandon that kind of black and white thinking. Curious what you guys think.
However, if I may,
yeah,
could you not argue that, of course, at the time and well after the end of the dictatorship, in any case, the constraints of the political context required that the film be perhaps opaque and ambiguous.
Completely, yeah.
But I agree, and I perhaps the ambiguity or the difficulty of understanding exactly who stands for what in the film and what is a signifier of what is crystallized in the father. No, in our group, in group one, we talked about how we see photographs of him with Unamuno. We see him listening to a BBC radio broadcast, yet at the same time he collaborates, or at least cooperates, with the police. And there's a sense of the kind of trauma or hidden, a sort of, I suppose, obedient silence in his actions, but a sense of repression perhaps as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Matthew. Yeah, and the father, I mean, the father is, I think, is clearly a loser of the war, right? He's lost a lot of things, and he's not in any position of power. Like you say, he has to adapt, has to collaborate in a way. You could read that as the bankruptcy of liberal Spain, as represented by Unamuno, right? The Spain that thought it could not take sides in the war. And Teresa, on the picture that Anna sees when she leaves through the photo album, has dedicated a picture from before the war to my lovely misanthrope, right? The idea that Fernando is kind of a loner. He looks down on humanity, like he's like Unamuno, right? It's that kind of like a distant, slightly arrogant, presumptuous position vis-a-vis sort of the folk and the people and the country and all that. So you could see that, you could think of his position as like he's suffered for it, but it's also not the way forward in a way, right? Could be. Other thoughts? Linda, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say the discussion is terrific, but there's one aspect no one really has touched on. One person mentioned the black and white images. Victor Arife loves the cinema. He learns about life through the cinema. In a way, he is Anna, who's learning about life through the cinema. So there's that whole aspect of the film that you all haven't touched on. Frankenstein, of course, back to he loves silent films. So just keep that in mind as well. Not a political interpretation, an artistic interpretation.
Yeah, and that's a really good bridge to. I haven't seen I'm not sure if you've seen his most recent movie yet.
Yeah.
But that is, from what I read in New Yorker, that's also a love letter to making movies, right? To cinema as a way of knowing and as a way of learning.
Yeah.
Somebody else raised their hands. Tony, go ahead.
Just really quick, if you do want to ask a question, you can use the raised hand button, which is on the reaction tabs, which is the little smiley face with the plus sign on it. Okay.
Tony, take it away.
I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, no. The one thing we haven't talked about is the metaphor of the beehive and the house as a beehive. We see it in the way the window panes are cut and the color of them. And so in a certain sense, the house is also a beehive. It is the colmena. So who is the spirit? Who is the spirit of that beehive? Is it Anna?
That's a really good question, Tony. I think, Steve, you're about to give an answer to Tony's great question. Steve, you're muted, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I raised my hand before you asked the question. But my only comment would be that I think that it might have been a reflection of society as a whole at that time. The bees were at the mercy of the beekeeper. And it might have been that. But my question was, I'm sorry I didn't pay attention to that too much, but I never really understood what the background of the filmmaker was in terms of the Civil War, where he lived, how it affected his family. Maybe you're not supposed to really think about that, but I can't help but think about that.
That's a good question. I actually don't know. Linda, do you know?
Yeah, well, he was born in 1940, so it's important that it was set in 1940. He's from the Basque country. So he was a little boy, in the early years, but he was definitely influenced by growing up during the dictatorship. As a young student, learning about film, they could not see, he remembers as a child, he could not see international films at all, unless there were some reels smuggled in through the airport that a customs officer would say, come down to the airport and see a reel of La Terra Trema or something like that. So he was very, very much influenced by the censorship of the Franco period, and he learned about life through the cinema. He said the cinema was our teacher as young kids because we had no access to the outside world otherwise.
That's interesting. Thank you, Linda. That's really good to know. Tony, back to your question for 1 second, because I did promise I'd come back to it. So if you think of the house as the beehive, but Fernando as the beekeeper as well, of his actual beehive,
right?
I would say that Fernando's view of society, which in the little, it's his writing that we hear him speak. He writes about like the people just going about their business. So it's his sort of top-down view of society, making him the little dictator of the beehive. Would have put him on a plane with kind of the dictator and with Franco in that way. And you could think of Anna as rebelling against that, precisely as an individual who makes up her own mind about good and evil, who connects with the monster. So there's something about that, maybe. I don't know. Molly.
Yeah, hi. I was raising my hand to keep commenting on the beehive
as
well. So I think with what you were just saying, Sebastian, it could be then that Anna is the queen bee, because there might be a beekeeper, but there's also a different form of control in a beehive. And someone put that in the chat and was like bringing that up, like as part of the question, could Anna maybe be the queen bee? I was thinking, just imagery wise, and I've really liked how you've said and reiterated several times that there's, this is really left up to interpretation. You can keep thinking about it. You might change. There's no clear, just like there's no clear good and evil, there's no clear answers to any of our interpretations. And I feel that way about the beehive. Like, I definitely thought about the collective and the collective spirit. And I definitely thought about, like, especially with La Colmena by Jose Cela. Like, I definitely was like, okay, like the people. But I actually had the privilege of just teaching this movie last week to my students.
Fun.
And we talked about how at the same time that beehives are a collective, they're also divided in the hexagons. So you have like a cellular or isolated aspect, even though you are part of the collective, which then would go back with our interpretation of like where their house is and them in the town, how no one's talking, but everyone's kind of working and just going about their life, right? So you have this duality again where you can interpret it with the collective and you can also see some separation. And I feel like that duality continues. Like, okay, he has the beehives. The first time we see it, it's outside. But then we also have one inside with glass. That's very different. And so, yeah, you can see through the glass one. You can't see through the others that are actually producing a lot more honey. The one inside has a funnel to go outside. So there's like this like in and out. And right. And we have Anna, the nice shot of the spiral where she's looking up the part where they can go out. And so then my students and I are talking more and we're like, okay, the beehive pattern in the windows and doors and the glass in the house is like this in and out and things being shut versus open. And then we tied that to like the shots of the girls running down the hallway through the open doors and the emptiness. So just playing around, I think, with no real answer myself, but like this like a cellular and an in out, public, collective, singular, queen bee, beekeeper.
Yeah.
There's like, there's a lot there. I have just more questions and ideas than any answers.
It's really great. Well, in the end, what it does do, it brings home the idea of like cinema. There's nothing like cinema to make us think, right? And to learn about that sense. It really is like a love letter to the cinema and a proof of how cinema can operate, right? It can be open up so many, it can be so directly connecting with us and yet leave us kind of guessing about what we are thinking about this and what it's trying to tell us. And that's really, I think, to me, that makes this movie, like every time I see it, I see new things. And teaching it is so much fun because there's so much to talk about. Linda, you can take it away.
Me, Linda? Linda Willem?
Yeah, Linda Willem. Yeah, your hand.
Okay, I don't want to step on the other Linda.
No, sorry, the other Linda.
Yeah. I just wanted to. I also have taught this movie many times, and I just wanted to thank the last person who talked about, because we always say, "Who's the spirited beehive?" All that. The fact that you said that Anna is the queen bee. I love that. I'm gonna use that next time I have my class, and I especially like it because it's the idea that who is the one person in this beehive that's going to keep the spirit of republicanism going. It is going to be her, because she's the one who is associating herself with the monster, and the monster is associated with the Maquis. Even that lovely scene that's very, very much there's a parallel visually where Anna is handing, I don't know, is it the apple, some fruit to the Maquis, and it looks just like the scene, only flipped that was in the Frankenstein movie. So there's all of these things. But yeah, thank you who just told me that. You gave me something to do for my next class. Thank you.
Linda, also her image, at the end, the image of her in the water is Frankenstein.
Yeah.
So when we talked about who the monster is, like, sure, it could be the Maquis, but my students were also hanging on to, it could be Anna, the reflection. They would not let that scene go.
Yeah, but then that makes sense, right? Because if the Frankenstein is associated with the Maquis, and then he can also be associated with Anna, they all are together carrying on this Republican spirit that certainly the parents are not carrying on. Certainly the Maquis can't anymore because he's dead. So yeah.
Great. So we're out of time. This was such an amazing discussion. I had such a good time. Thank you for the groups did amazing work. The reporters did amazing work summarizing the amazing work of the groups. The only thing I want to tell everybody is that on October 24th is our next session. Joe Lavagni, the great Joe Lavagni, emerita at NYU, will be talking about the Spanish Earth, the best known documentary shot during the war about the war by Joris Ivens, the Dutch filmmaker, together with Ernest Hemingway and Helene van Dongen. So that's going to be a treat, I bet, to do that with Joe. And then it looks like we'll skip November because it's just with Thanksgiving, too many things going on. We have other events going on. We'll be back then in December. Likely, we'll let you know what movie we're doing in December. But thank you so much for all your amazing contributions. I learned, I've taught this film many times. I learned a lot from you all. And don't forget to donate if you feel so inclined, tax deductibly. And we hope to see you all next time. Thank you so much for everything.
Thanks.
Bye,
Ciao.
everybody.